Five, four, three, two, one.
All right. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 261 on Sunday, the 11th of December, 2022. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
I'm Matt.
And we're very lucky to be joined down the line this evening with Ethan Indigo. How are you doing, Ethan?
Peace on earth. Thanks so much, you guys.
You're welcome.
Nice to have you.
Nice.
Someone sent us a link with you talking to MYP recently.
Cool.
And I listened to a bit of it, and within, minutes, I thought, oh, wow, yeah, Helen's onto something here. I'd like to talk to you. So thanks for joining us. We were just saying before.
I'm appreciative to be here, and I'm appreciative of her to link us up and listen to what I was saying.
Yeah, I've seen you've done a lot of books, and I thought sacred geometry is something that we've sort of scratched around the edges on, and it comes up every now and again because it sort of falls under this umbrella of esoteric subjects. And I thought it'd be good to maybe get your ideas on sort of the foundation of sacred geometry and where it comes from, because I know from personal experience, if you bring the term sacred geometry up into a normal everyday conversation, you're generally met with derisive laughter, scoffing,
Sure.
fluoride stare. And, is Harry and Meghan on yet?
And I, it is a taboo almost to bring it up, really. And partly because, in my humble observation, it actually has kind of been adopted by way of a lot of New Age streams and parallels that are kind of woo-woo, if you forgive me. Not that it all is, but it has this tendency to be caught up in the selling of crystals on the corner, so to speak. What I started looking at, and what really struck me as being a profound way to conceptualize sacred and not really enhance observational skills and one's understanding, and really steady one's mind state as well, through what I call the 4 dimensions of sacred geometry. Geometry means earth measure, and that's why I mean that understanding the concept of sacred geometry will allow us to understand earth and reality, all that is under that, a little bit better, potentially. Actually, I was in Sedona, Arizona, which I call the metaphysical armpit of the United States. It is a beautiful and wonderful, we were mentioning earlier a cathedral in Salisbury. Sedona is a cathedral unto itself. It's so beautiful. It's unlike any area, any place in the area, which is mostly desert. It has these mountains and these amazing formations that are just kind of magical. But a friend of mine was just telling me her meditation practice, and I'm obsessed with 4, not just 4 dimensions of geometry. It's one of the things I'm obsessed with via my obsession with 4. But she was describing her meditation practice, and as she was describing it, it occurred to me how what she was saying was very geometrical. And I said, that I said to her as we were having lunch, and we were discussing things, that sounds just like the four dimensions of geometry. To which she described what, and so the conversation moved on, but it became that night something that I couldn't stop thinking about, because her meditation practice, and pretty much every meditation practice that I've come across, begins with focusing on a point of concentration. Often enough, the very word point is, as was in this meditation that she described to me, but often it will be a subject matter concerning a point or of focus. So to begin with, the four dimensions of geometry are points, lines, planes, and solids. And actually, if you're going to draw a sacred geometrical picture, you'll generally begin with a point, even if it's a line maybe, but usually people start with a point in the center. But the beginning of a line, of course, is a point by default. And one of the geometrical rules is that you cannot have a line without points, and you cannot have a plane without lines, and there is no solid without planes.
Yeah, this is a great point. It's like if you picture a line in your head, think of it as a series of points, one after the other. That's the simplest way, and it works the same way with lines into planes and then planes into solid objects.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And in a meditation correspondence, and again, I don't like using the words all and never, because it kind of, there's always exceptions, but generally most all meditations are formulated in this same sacred geometry of meditation process. The point is symbolic for concentration. The line is symbolic for connection. The circle is symbolic for circulation. And the solid or volume is symbolic or corresponds with what I call unity expansion. And in geometry and in this meditation kind of understanding of energy, a point is generally considered to be a place that may take up no space. And so a point can be just designated of a spot in space. And we can also depict the sun as a point. Of course, it is a volume, right? But I'm just talking about how the energy of it can be understood. That the point kind of transitions into a volume and a new point, sometimes, depending on how you're looking at things. And so, as I was researching this, of course, there's many meditations that depict this process, not overtly, not specifically, but in understanding this sacred geometry of meditation, as I call it, it's really almost explicitly there. And as I began to explore it, it seemed to me to be also a way to comprehend not only earth material, but earth energy, subtle energy, if you will. And as I was looking into it, and through my already developed obsession with four, it became obvious to me that this sacred geometry of points, lines, planes, and solids was in many places, but among them being the divination process or energy understanding lessons that are in the tarot. And the tarot is made up of the four suits, of course, where we get our modern day playing cards from. And the four suits are swords, which is symbolic for points, and staffs or wands, which is symbolic, of course, of lines, and coins, which is symbolic of planes, and cups, which is symbolic of a volume. And so I found that there's many ways to understand meditation a little bit better and even comprehend what might be to some considered woo woo when you just say like subtle energy. Oh, this guy's on some selling crystals on the corner stuff.
Or going accumulators.
Right. So, but when when you kind of bring up ancient traditions and mathematics, then it becomes kind of as hard to argue but as other intangible concepts, including mathematics, right? Which is an intangible.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking on your Sacred Geometry website, and I think on your homepage you have the quote that Plato had carved in above the entrance of his academy at Athens.
That's right. Let none. Well, there's a few variations that I've seen of the translation or of the phrase. Let none ignorant of geometry enter. And when you don't actually conceptualize sacred geometry, that phrase kind of seems like, well, this school is, focused on mathematics. So maybe they were imparting a sacred geometry idea in their system as well. Which, to that point, one of the foundational symbols, I don't even know if I would call it a symbol, but let's just call it a symbol for simplification. One of the oldest ideas in the Western world is the Tetragrammaton.
Yahweh, Hodveh.
Yes, right. And this is a Hebrew word with a Greek signification or name, right? And the Greek name, of course, is for, well, as I understand it, Tetragrammaton, one of the most feared words in the English language is pentagram, but not pentagrammaton. Pentagram, not pentagrammaton. Pentagram meaning five shape, if you will, but a five aspect shape. So a tetragram would be a four aspect concept or shape, but a tetragrammaton is something different, or at least the word is different. Usually when different words, they have different meanings. But if you look at that word etymologically, a ton corresponds with or very similar to Asian. So it's tetragrammation. But we don't say grammation. We say grammar. So tetragrammaton, I think this is to explore this word is a taboo. Right? So maybe this is why people haven't mentioned this idea before, because even to say it for hundreds of years was a taboo. Attempted to pronounce it, if you will. But a grammation, gram is grammar. So what is for grammar? Well, if you look at a corresponding symbol with the tetragrammaton, it is the Tetractys, the Greek triangular system of 1, 2, 3, 4, four layers.
From Pythagoras.
Excuse me. Yes, thank you. the Pythagorean comprehension, and these are the folks who, of course, came up with the idea of if you don't know geometry, you're not coming in. And there's an idea of that 4 equals 10, and I think it comes from this tetragrammaton correspondence with the 10 points of the Tetractys. The tetragrammaton is often depicted in a triangle, just like the Tetractys, and I think that's where that comes from. And also, the triangle represents the Trinity, and the phrase of God, the four-grammer, represents the quadrinity or quadranity, if you will. But it's which is the 7 too, right? So all these numbers, I swear, they all come from an understanding of the tetragrammaton as a symbol. But I think also what is in this tetragrammaton, as I'm long-windedly explaining myself, there is the points, lines, planes, and solids correspondence in the Yod He Vav He, right? And that's why I think that in this idea, the circles and the an optimal volume figure is, of course, a globe, right? In nature, we see a circular object, so that's why there's the 2 similar descriptions there. But literally, there's the point and there's a line in the tetragrammaton, those 4 letters.
How does that work? Because the ve is repeated, isn't it?
Yes, and that's what I meant to say, that the ve in that 4 aspect concept symbolizes the circle, the plane, and the circle that is the globe. Sorry,
right, get you.
No, don't be sorry.
Right. Yeah, I find this very interesting. When I saw that you put the Plato's above the entrance, what was it about being ignorant of geometry? It got me thinking about why geometry was so important, because it was probably well understood at the academy that they were teaching the 7 liberal arts, the trivium and the quadrivium. And the way I've always thought about, if we leave the trivium, because that's just language and the mechanics of using language to understand the world and stuff, but when you think about the more speculative 4, the quadrivium, the way I've always thought about it was that number was the string that attached them all. So you had mathematics, which is sums and adding and multiplying and how numbers interact. Then you've got geometry, which is number in space. Third one is music, which is number in time. Music can't exist without time. You need to define the length of a note to be able for a note to exist. And then the 4th one being astronomy, which would be number in space plus time, because you're looking at the celestial, whatever they are,
beautiful
lights. And they're in motion, and the only way you can measure that motion of the celestial goings on is through time. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, well, number is the thing that unites them all. It's sort of what gives meaning to them all. And it just got me wondering, because Plato's a lot brighter than me, why Plato put so much emphasis on geometry, the second one. Why that one? Have you got any ideas?
Well, I love your conceptual understanding of all that first. And from what I understand, and there's the monad of the ancient Greek idea, right? And this is symbolic of God. And what is it? It's a point in a center. And this is kind of why I think maybe sacred sites are even built, is to make a center point. There it is. Whether or not, what is the center in a circle? Well, you first create the center, circle around it, and you have it. And further, I think what the ancient Greeks, through that idea of the monad, um, came this whole idea of creation, which is in a kind of mind mental framework of it anyway. There's a lot of different ways to look at creation, but there's really points, lines, planes, and solids. Just like geometry rules infer abstractly, but there's really atomic particles, right? And there's sinews. So there's a bunch of different ways to conceptualize that, but creation, you have to imagine it first. And the monad, I think what they were getting at through the monad was that the point comes first. Geometry came first, right? Because first is the point, and then what's next? The line. And only then is there a one and a two, which, from my understanding, often enough, they didn't really consider these numbers because of that.
Yeah.
Three was the first number. And they hated two. And there's we have so few understandings of what they were actually comprehending. One of them that we do have, though, is that they would spit whenever anyone brought up the doad, the two.
The two, yeah.
Because of the either or divisive symbolism in that no one of free, open-minded really likes. The either or concept is something that really ignorant people are left to, and that fascist institutions design, right? So they did not like the two. The one was, of course, very sacred. And so after there's the point, and then the line, and then another line. You have then the minimal number of lines for a plane. And then with a fourth line, you have the minimal number of lines for a solid object, the tetrahedron. and from then the numbers get going from there. But I think they were conceptualizing the literal geometry initially with the first couple of numbers, and then numbers beyond that.
Yeah, I was reading a book it's commonly attributed to Iamblichus, but I don't think anyone actually knows who wrote it. Some ancient Greek guy, and that goes all into the sort of mysticism that you're talking about the monad, the doad, the triad, and the tetrad, and the sort of what do you call them? Oh gosh, like it's a mystery. Where you like rabbit's foot. You have a rabbit's foot. Superstitions, yeah, the superstitions are out. Well, that's an ugly word to use for it, because there could be meaning in a lot of this, and there often is. It's not superstition's the wrong word, but
a standard stition.
It's about the mysticism that they believed was incorporated in these numbers, because these numbers translate into much greater concepts that allow us to describe the world around us. So I can't remember the name of the book, but just Google Iamblichus numbers and you'll find it. You can get it on Amazon.
Cool. I think I might have scanned it at least before. It sounds vaguely familiar. And I always look for the esoteric in the exoteric, right? As sacred geometry kind of reveals itself when you start looking at mathematics, if you will, through an esoteric understanding. And one of these Pythagorean tales struck me as having an esoteric lesson rather than a deduction that Pythagoras was very silly. That one of their traditions was that they did not eat beans because they saw beans as being a point of beginning and blooming into a full potential of consciousness, and even not only a human potential, but a God potential. And when he died, he was being chased I forget under what circumstances, if we know, but he came across a field of beans, and it was either get killed or trample the beans,
Oh, no.
and he died.
Oh, jeez.
First man to be killed by a field of beans.
So, and I don't know, there might be a flatulence layer to the understanding of it. I'm not sure, but
That's the
no,
fifth
I think
dimension.
there's something. I think there's something to the idea of there's these infinite points that were confounding him, or there's a lesson in that, I think, beyond that just the how silly he was.
Yeah, I agree. Now, like, what were some of your biggest influences when it comes to this sort of stuff? When it comes to like what you've learned in your researches, is there certain books that you've gone back and reread because there was so much in them, or what? Certain individuals who sort of helped you research more than others?
Well, Manly P. Hall is an exceptional resource. All of his work is really profound, and I really I not necessarily designed after him, but in exploring his creations and discussions so much, he really is about unifying many different traditions and unifying humanity in that idea, and finding through that in that finding what are the really powerful principles, these lessons of diversity, and bringing things together. So that's one thing I find that I like to do, but I didn't necessarily know that I like to do it until after having done it so much, is really bringing together what is often seen as diversity. But yeah, Manly P. Hall, Passio's lectures are amazing. Mark Passio. Um, they're a great contrast in the sense that Manly P. Hall is very much not aggressive at all, and Mark Passio is maybe, if anything, too aggressive. But he has a great level of bringing together the wisdom of the world, and finding that power in humanity rather than promoting a specific origination concept or a specific ism. I'm definitely, I find as I've grown, I've become anti-ism.
Good point. Yeah. Now then, when we were talking earlier about a point being an infinite number of, sorry, a line being an infinite number of points, and then a plane being an infinite number of lines, and a solid being an infinite number of planes. What would an infinite number of solids look like? Would that be the fourth dimension?
Well, it could be, but I think what happens is there's really one in that sense. When there's I mean, you could consider planets as being their own solid, or even a rock as being its own solid or volume, or a cup. But really, I think everything is the universe, right? The one entirety. And we see science, verifying this, being confounded by thought, being able to be faster than light, right? And to be able to affect light. And so really in this idea of unity expansion related to the fourth dimension, it's really a matter, not only do we feel connected to people, but it's, from where does intuition derive? And that divination practice of tarot, which is really arguably based on the four dimensions, as I referenced earlier, is about intuition, right? Even the learning of what the cards might offer someone at a time without a reading, so to speak, but just looking at the life lessons through these images, and then being able to just grasp intuition is, I think, the idea, not necessarily the cards. And this understanding of sacred geometry helps. One thing I found in exploring for that wherever there's often an unsaid, even silent and removed fourth aspect. And of course, there's what I call the trinity of time, which is really inarguable: past, present, and future. But from where does intuition arrive? Definitely anyone who's experienced it, I assume you guys have, even the flickers of it. This comes from a place of timelessness, right? And so this is that silent fourth dimension I propose of time. And that's from where intuition, I think, arrives from. It definitely doesn't come from the past. It's it's not necessarily something we might have even been seeking in that present moment, but it might relate to all past, present, and future. But it kind of has a feeling that's different, and that's, I think, where intuition arrives from, if you will. And again, that's just a conceptual idea, not necessarily provable, thought, literal idea.
It kind of makes sense that whatever dimension you happen to be living in, you can always perceive at least one face of the next dimension. And that's how you concept it within your own dimension. So it kind of makes sense that if time is three-dimensional, you would be able to get sort of snapshots of something that exists beyond time, beyond the three dimensions of time you mentioned. And maybe that's where it comes from.
Yeah. Maybe four's not enough dimensions. I mean, string theory references 11 spatial dimensions. Obviously,
Sure.
none of that's proven. But, some of this idea that intuition comes from somewhere, there doesn't have to be 11 dimensions, does it? There could be an infinite number of spatial dimensions that we don't fully understand, which is just mind-blowing, to be frank.
It is, and I don't ever like to limit my perspective via four-dimensional conceptuality, if you will. I like to use it to find X, Y, and Z, right? In that, like the reason that the Pythagoreans would spit when they heard anyone mention concepts, right? There's actually in a mathematical sense, but that has a philosophical and rational conceptual parallel that is an inarguable. There is the thesis and the antithesis. Excuse my lisp. There's the A and the B, right? And there's the synthesis, the AB. Right. And definitely the United States government predominantly works by way of this. There's the one bad idea, the other bad idea. They come up with a combination of a really bad idea that has both elements. And I only half jest. But this idea also is referenced in the Hegelian dialect, but also in really primal foundational philosophy of ancient India, that is at times called a tetralema, or at times called katsuki, which again has the A and emphasis, the AB, and the X, the complete other, which could to your point, contain 7 other for the 11 dimensions or what have you, right? It's really, I call it the nullisis,
Right.
And so they have the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis, and then there's X, which is the nullisis, something totally outside the darned monad dynamic that they're trying to limit the discussion to. that we should all that we should all not stand for, because it's a very limiting set of framework, right? So the Katsuki idea, A or B or A, B or X, totally mathematically sound way of looking at any inference as a base in a bunch of more ways to comprehend anything, of course, and best to approach things that way. But there's never the either or, right? That's where we get mixed up and steered into a synthesis that they might have already reckoned.
Yeah, only a Sith deals in absolutes. You mentioned, or was it Ben? I can't remember, about the possibility of unlimited or infinite dimensions. That sounds fractal to me.
Yeah, I mean, X would cover all that, wouldn't it? It's a
Yeah.
catch-all. It's literally
Yeah.
everything that isn't A or B or AB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bit of a cop
Yeah,
out.
it kind of in that sense, well, one could say, but I think it's more of a freeing device. As soon as we realize that, right, the Hegelian triad that everyone freaks out over is completely diminished. There's always X.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be limited by the either or foundational argument of Republicans and Democrats, for instance, right? Or in a bigger picture, the supposed globalists and the anti-globalists. No, I'm not limited by that. I don't like either of them.
Yeah, but it's ubiquitous, and especially
Absolutely.
in their favorite tool, which is advertising. Are you a Mac or a PC? Coke or Pepsi?
Sure.
No, the dualism is
Sure.
everywhere. It's hard to escape it.
And often enough, it is contrived, as in the idea of hot and cold, right? Which is, as we know, is a spectrum of degrees rather than extremes. But we have our sensitivity that automatically understands these communicated poles. But I think it's a very simple way to understand things, and in that, it's very safe. So we don't have to continue questioning things. It's A or B. That's where most people actually stay.
So for a hot and cold, you've obviously got your degrees of warmth would be your AB, and then what would your X just be? Zero sensitivity?
Well, I think scientifically, there is no cold. There's only lacking heat.
Ah, yes, of course.
Right?
Entropy.
So it just is a spectrum. It's theorized that the reality can only get so hot and so cold, but we don't know that to be the case. But I'm pretty sure it makes sense anyway that there's really no source of cold. There's sources of heat, But again, sometimes we want to polarize things it's just sets us up to now we know, right? Because if we have a sense of the poles, don't we have a sense of everything, we conceptualize that way. And there's a Zen
Say that again,
expression.
Ethan. Say that again,
Doubt,
Ethan. You broke
great
up.
awakening. Oh, sorry. I was saying, when we conceive the poles, we tend to be able to conceive everything in between, in that degree comprehension, and beyond temperature, of course, and or at least we set up our mindset to be confident that we do. There is a Zen expression: great doubt, great awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. No doubt, no awakening. So I think when we're confident we understand things, usually we don't. And that's what they say about quantum physics. If you think you get it, keep trying. Right.
Yeah, one of the things you were talking about that you've just rung my bell was what's famously known as the Three Monkeys. But obviously you're obsessed with four, Ethan, so What's the fourth monkey?
The fourth monkey, if we look at those supposed powers that be that would like to limit the mindset of people via such constructs as the aforementioned Hegelian dialect, they also would have liked to make us think that there's only three monkeys. The institutions such as that would have definitely liked to be rid of the fourth monkey. The most typically known of the wise monkeys are see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. The fourth wise monkey is
Does it smell no
often
evil?
omitted. No, no, because it's actually it's a good question because I've contemplated this before. It doesn't have the same um, um, ability to digest information and expel proper information. If we were like dogs and had an olfactory sensory of that nature, we might be able to communicate a whole lot through just that smell power. But generally, it's not a means of communicating observation. So the fourth monkey is fear no evil or do no evil. And he or it holds his dantian or his center point as understood in Eastern meditative movements, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, and just esoteric idea. Everything begins from one's dantian, one's center. And fear no evil is unmoved. He does nothing. And the powers that be often would use the Hegelian dialectic to make people go, oh no, we have to do this because of it's very scary. And so the four wise monkeys, actually the only one that is wise is the one who looks, listens, and communicates without being still and thereby caused to move. And four is a homonym with death in Japanese and Chinese and some other smaller languages in Asia thereabouts. And it's similar to the 13 in the Western world where we wouldn't have floor number 13 on the elevator buttons. Of course, if you count it, well, they're okay. But same thing in some older buildings in the East. There's no fourth floor in the presentation. And so, but four is a homonym for death in the completion idea. Because how many seasons are there? How many dimensions of geometry are there? Well, to your point, Ben, there's way more dimensions in total reality than just four. There's way more ways to understand the dimensions of social reality, for instance, than just four. But it's a wonderful base, and there's also only four dimensions of arithmetic, if you will, four operations of arithmetic. And so four tends to be this really base format to begin to look at things and begin to be that fourth monkey, kind of seeing things a little bit better, sensing what's spoken a little bit better, and able to speak on reality, right? This is really, we're in the age of information, an information era, if you will. And we're seeing, I think, this take place a lot where information moves so fast. And I mean, sometimes comes out even before the institution was going to have it meant to, like that, we're really able to embody that fourth monkey a little bit more, by being able to, he's not speaking the truth, right? When you put out there and someone isn't speaking it, they become this elitist archetype, the one who holds back on information. That third supposed wise monkey who's like whispering to his buddies, "Hey."
I see football managers do that a lot as well.
They do, don't they?
Exactly. And they have a perfectly obviously good reason to do so.
Yeah, they're
to win the
conspiring.
game. That's it. And it's a game, and that's tactic. And even in a horrible military confrontation, you hold back, you might do that. But if we're going to live in a free and open society, those who are restricting information start to get questionable at the least, right? I call it Lord Acton's rule, in homage to your countrymen of the past, who the biggest part of that quote is something akin to, "How dare they tell me not to question Pope and King? These are the ones who need to be questioned, because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So he was directly referring to the authoritarian, informational, restricting, and so forth and so on, oligarchical groups of the past. He was saying, no, we need to open information.
Yeah, it's the key to everything, isn't it? I wonder what would
Yeah.
be the monkey who sees no evil? Is that a monkey who sees something that he knows is wrong happening and then what? Talks himself out of it, or fails to act, or what?
A great way, maybe this is too deep, but I think you and your listeners will appreciate it. Another set of four that is a foundational philosophy that precedes even the Garden of Eden, which of course there's four first characters of the Bible in, is the allegory of the cave. And the allegory of the cave depicts these four archetypes wonderfully. The first two in the cave are the chained and unchained prisoners that are kept by the third monkey archetype, or the captors in the cave. The chained are not quite there. They still need to be held down. They have some idea that the figures on the wall might not
be shadows,
be reality in total. And so they're chained because they might get up. They're still might get up. The idiots, or excuse me, the blind monkeys, right? They're the unchained in that respect. They don't even need to be chained down. They're completely transfixed with, well, for instance, that either or conceptuality, right? Either it's shade or it's light, maybe,
Man City or Man United.
And the fourth, yeah. The fourth character or archetype of the cave is the freed prisoner. And he realizes that he was living in a cave and the shadows weren't real, and that the sun is reality. And he goes back and tries to tell the chained and the unchained, hey, you guys are being played. And they're so transfixed that they mock him and threaten him with violence, as the allegory kind of suggests.
Yeah, this is.
So,
Excuse me.
The blind monkeys are completely transfixed with the fake reality in that allegory of the cave, which again, it precedes the Garden of Eden. It is insidious in its cultural effects, even up until 1984 and the Matrix and so on.
How's it before the Garden
let alone government design? Sorry.
How's it before the Garden of Eden? Because it's from Plato's Republic, which would have been about 350
600 BC, right?
600?
Okay. That's what I thought. It was 600, but I mean, in the Bible, right? It's before that Garden of Eden story.
Right. It's a great one to look up. It's so it's so relatable. It just gets you thinking because you picture yourself as being the prisoner who returns to try and drag everyone out, and they won't believe it.
And we can see that in our reality. And of course, the great way to just conceptualize it is TV. And I compare it too with the Genesis story in the Garden of Eden because of the archetypes in that, right? And actually, this I'll dare all, maybe I shouldn't, but practically all theology begins with what is this duality of polarity, the masculine and feminine, and God and the detractor of God, or the devil, often enough. But sometimes it's subtle, less than, because the devil is always not equitable to God. It's always some schmuck, So, but these four archetypes, you could say that Adam is the idiot. Adam is the blind monkey, because he literally just, oh, what did you say? I'll do that. Oh, you said something different? I'll do that. And Eve is the monkey who's not hearing anything else but the story that she's been given, that being the last one. And God is, one could say, the wise monkey, the fourth aspect, and the devil is the one who secrets the whole story.
Right, the serpent who persuades Eve.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, this Garden of Eden story, because there are so many different ways to interpret it. Like if you take the Gnostic interpretation of the Garden of Eden story, it's just completely polarizingly different from the traditional one, because they see the serpent as the fount of wisdom. He's right in the end. God says, if you eat of the fruit, you will surely die. And the serpent says, no, you'll be right. And they survive, and it makes you think. But they do die eventually.
Yes.
And I think that they were maybe immortal before the discretion. So I think maybe that's a common argument I hear about the Gnostic, bashing the Gnostics about the Garden of Eden story. They say that God was wrong. God was proved incorrect because they didn't die when they ate the forbidden fruit. And I think, well, no, because they do die. And I'm pretty sure they're meant to be immortal before then.
Interesting.
And it's very interesting because every other tradition around the world refers to that serpent or snake energy as being related to wisdom. And even the Bible does a serpent and gentle as a dove, right? Is one of the expressions from the Bible. So yeah, there is I think that layer of interpretation that's valid to contemplate.
What's like your?
And sometimes as we go, please.
It's all right. It's okay. We've got like a 2-second delay, I think, so it's making a bit choppy.
Yeah, I apologize.
I was just going to ask you, like, how your research and writing your books and stuff has coloured your sort of ideas on theology and about creation or God, for lack of a better word.
Well, I saw a great picture the other day that I find really reflected one way to perceive it. I find that my perspective on that is shifting a lot, but I enjoy a Taoist if I'm going to be an ist or an ism. I really like the Taoist kind of interpretation of energy and reality, godliness, and God. But this meme that I saw the other day, it had a container within a container within a container, and the first container within the three was religion, and it was in another container which was spirituality. And of course, these were both in a third container of consciousness. So I think there's a level of understanding of God's godliness, religion, and certainly the allegory that is in the Bible and other spiritual theological text that is esoteric in nature, that is meant to help us better understand ourselves and reality, quite simply, rather than talking about a specific dogmatic God.
Yeah, the thing that always turns me off with sort of organized religion is that it's run by blokes, men, generally, and we know that men are all corruptible. And as what Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs through the center of everyone's heart. And when with influence and power and wealth, I mean, I'm not picking on the Catholic Church, but if you look at the Catholic Church, you know, the way they dealt with heresy from, you know, 4th century onwards, Albigensian Crusade and all the rest of it, all done in the name of God. And you can, you know, the same story goes for any of the big five or any other religion. It seems that that's the root of the problem, is that there's always going to be malevolent people wanting the power and the money and the control and then dictating these absolutes. And my sort of idea is I don't believe as soon as someone thinks they know something and they're dogmatic in that sense, it just completely turns me off, because we really don't know anything.
I agree completely, and just living as an observer has led me to have a great disdain for religious institutions, especially those on further consideration that are monolithic, and that being monotheistic, right? Because let's just look at monotheism from a philosophical perspective, and actually just an observational understanding. Monotheism is more actually, it's not that there's one God, because they all admit worshiping the same one God, the big three monotheists anyway. And it's really more one way to perceive God. And so as soon as you start getting into that monotheistic programming, you actually create what the Pythagoreans would spit unto and about. Because when there is one, that creates all those other folks, the us and the them. So it immediately creates a doad of really quite horrible historicity, if you will. The history, the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, has been directly traceable to monotheists and the monolithic, by extension, fighting and perpetuating their idea with insistency. So I've begun to consider exactly what you just mentioned, with more specific guilt, if you will, at the monotheists rather than religious, because they lead us, no matter what. Even the best monotheist would eventually be wrong. If there's one way to move a refrigerator, eventually you'll find a house where you need to do it a different way. But you only have one way, and then it's wrong. For instance, excuse my simplification, but monotheism is very much like that. There's one way to perceive God, and if we look at some in the day where monotheism was kind of disrupted, you had one wayism in the state. This monolithic idea in many states is directly traceable to the horror consciousness that is this monotheistic insistency that there's one way to perceive. So I really I agree with you 100%, and that this monolithic, monothematic thinking that is extended from monotheism is a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to shit on religious people at all.
Exactly.
And I think it comes down to individuals. I mean, if you go back to ancient Rome carried out all sorts of atrocities with the backing of paganism and a multi-god religion. And if you look at the 20th century, the history of the 20th century, many of the millions of deaths that occurred there were done in the name of other ideologies that weren't particularly theological, like communism in Mao, with Mao and Stalin, or Nazism. So I think that I hear what you're saying. I just I'm reluctant to bash monotheism as hard, because I think it comes down to men.
I mean more what
and
you're
people.
saying. I mean exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
That this monotheism is there's an expression. Culture runs downstream of religion, and government runs downstream of culture.
Right.
And so what I mean to say is that this insistence of monotheism that turns into the monolithic and monothematic, with or without God, and actually by extension, atheists are more monolithic than monotheists.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Right? So what I'm pointing to is exactly what you're saying. The monolithic insistence, it does not require religion, but such a powerful on our thinking that even the people who aren't necessarily religious might adopt by inference this monolithic idea. You're absolutely right. It
Yes.
does not require theology. 100%.
Yeah, that's great. I like that, the way you characterize that there. I think it's just a nature of our civilization that theology would be one of the earliest tools used by psychopaths in our past to weaponize property and influence and power and that sort of thing, because of the nature of us, and we're sort of questioning ourselves and our reality. What happens after we die? We're the only species who thinks about questions like this, and that leaves the door open for a theology to come in, give you all the answers, pay 10%, please, to the temple every month, whatever. So it was just one of the earliest tools that was developed, I guess, and that's why it's had such a historical impact over the last, probably for as long as there have been people.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, well said. And one understanding of magic is just steering the psyche, right? So I mean, whether it was once, we can see this steering of the psyche occurring, and you might even call it a magical proportion, because people get really into a zealous state. Often enough, they're so spellbound, by certain narratives, if you will.
Oh, it could be something as simple as watching a football team. In the UK, we had a big problem with hooliganism, more so in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, I guess, was when it was at its worst. And in Italy, it's even worse. You think of the Ultras?
They're called the Ultras, aren't they?
Yeah, for the teams in Rome, Lazio, and these places. And it's mainly young men with nothing better to do. And they can just, I don't know what it is. What it is that makes guys do this sort of, it's like a tribal thing, it's us against them. It's the same duality. It's I'm the red team, you're the blue team.
Yeah.
Ethan, we've done it over an hour already.
Of young men, to where if they're not. Sorry,
it's the delay. I was just saying we've done over an hour already.
I was just saying, what young men, if we're not given a battle to fight, hopefully a proverbial one, hopefully one that's very much akin to the biblical idea of building a tower, right? If a young man doesn't have a mission of building, he will fall into fighting. There's that idea: if you fall for something, you'll fall for anything, or whatever, right? And if you don't stand for something, even worse, you'll stand for anything, right? You'll stand for a football team and take on strangers for no other reason.
Yeah.
So if we give people something proper to stand for, I find they won't get into this, what is a bad pattern of fighting for nothing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right, Ethan, we've done over an hour. The link will be in the show notes. Is there anything you want to leave us with, or anywhere in particular you want to point people to?
Well, I got that Geometry of Energy website. I have books on Amazon. I'm working on a new book to continue my obsession with 4, called The Fourth Initiation. And I can be found on all the social media and all that. I don't think anyone's faking me yet, even.
Excellent. When's that book going to be out?
4, of course.
Excellent.
Won't have it any different. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to sign off for part 1. Stay on the line for us, Ethan, for a minute while we play ourselves out.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's been a
Peace,
pleasure.
guys.
Thank you. Fantastic, Ethan. Thanks.
The rest of you in podcast land will be back after a short break in 15 minutes or so. Part 2. Okay. Sayonara.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.